Today we'll be focusing on donuts and demand elasticity.
Our story begins with four hungry men with a powerful craving for donuts. Unfortunately for them, there is only one donut left in the only donut store in town. But take a closer look at the donut and see the word gas.
We're going to take a closer look at the supply and demand curves of this scenario, explore why the price of a good, either donuts or gas, rises so rapidly when there is a scarcity of that good, and finally look at how consumer preferences can be changed. First, let's tell the story through the lens of donuts.
Let's look at the demand curve.
These men want that donut, at whatever price they have to pay. A demand curve, which shows the relationship between price and quantity consumed, slopes down and to the right. That is the higher price, the less one consumes. But what is the actual slope? This is an example of a steeply sloped, relatively inelastic demand curve. Elasticity describes the relationship between demand and price in terms of the slope of that curve. Here, for example, though the price goes up a relatively large amount from price 1 to price 2, there is a very small change in quantity consumed. This kind of relationship is represented by a steep slope, which shows that the demand is inelastic. That is, demand changes though the price goes up. The men in our cartoon show this as they do not stop bidding on the donuts though the price almost doubles.
Now let's look at the supply curve. Supply of donuts is clearly down. There is only one donut left on the shelf. The supply curve typically slopes upward to the right. That is, the higher the price, the more donuts, in this case, would be available. But this supply curve is perfectly inelastic. It's vertical because there's only one donut available, no matter what the price. However, the demand stays the same as those men want that donut at whatever price.
Now let's turn to the question of consumer choices, how different choices are reflected in the market, and how these preferences can be changed.
Specifically, we want to consider when and how can we get the average consumer in a market like the United States, where unhealthy eating, think donuts, and pollution, think back to the word gas, are two huge issues, to move to a healthier option or to use cleaner energy options, though they are both often more expensive. Once more, we see the relationship between price and quantity consumed.
If cheap gas is the only energy source and it is scarce, the price will be driven up, as we saw in our supply and demand curves. What happens if we introduce a new source of energy other than cheap gas to the market? First, let's look at the supply curve.
In our first supply curve, the only supply we have is that one portion of gas, represented by the donut in our cartoon. If our supply curve represents energy sources and we open up our supply to include energy sources other than cheap gas, the supply curve will shift to the right as there is more of the good available, and it would be presumably more elastic, as more supply will be available at higher prices. This is shown in the move from S1 to S2 in the graphs. Adding more sources of energy to the market allows for an expansion of the energy market as a whole. If there is an increased amount of supply of energy sources, based on the graph, the price of energy sources as a whole will go down. From this, we may see a shift in the demand curve. For example, the demand curve could rise because of the increased supply and therefore lower price. Although it would appear that the price of all sources of energy, including clean energy, would be driven down, this is not always the case. Even if people would like to aspire to use a cleaner energy option rather than cheap gas, clean energy sources may still be more expensive than the rising price of cheap gas. Additionally, many consumers are unable to invest in expensive technology to actually use the clean energy sources, like hybrid or alternative energy cars. Gas for many is a necessity. They need it to power their cars and heat their homes. At its higher price, cleaner energy can be considered a luxury. It is a better product than gas at a higher price.
In fact, these sources of energy are today such different products that they would probably be represented by two separate supply curves on two separate graphs. A way people become incentivized to purchase goods that are better for their health or for the health of the environment, even if the options are above their price range, is to make the health risks of buying harmful gas appear to be too large not to bend to the curve in some way. Effectively, with education, you could change the slope of the curve or its position on the graph, incorporating a new cost into the overall price calculation. Organizations that focus on aiding the environment might pay for ads to air on local channels or put up billboards, educating potential customers on the serious risks and urging consumers to buy the less harmful, more expensive alternatives. These ads might argue that a lifetime of using cheap, harmful gas might later result in serious health issues that will be expensive to take care of. In this case, the opportunity cost of buying more expensive energy sources now may be less than the cost of treating cancer due to exposure to toxic chemicals later, persuading people to buy clean energy now. Educating the public can lead to a change in preference and thus what kind of things they decide to purchase.
In addition to health warnings, a pollution tax on gas could potentially narrow the price difference between cheap gas and cleaner energy options. This much smaller price gap between the two could push people to choose the option that is just slightly more expensive but better for the environment. With both education of consumers and with a gas tax, consumers may be pushed to pick a more sustainable energy option instead of gas.
In a similar way, maybe if our donut store taxed the unhealthy donuts to make the price comparable to oatmeal, a healthier breakfast option, or showed the risks of obesity on a huge sign next to the donuts, our men would be less inclined to continue their bidding on their precious donut and question their decision to buy donuts from now on.
As we consider ways to change this equation to guide consumers towards healthier living, either better diets or less polluting energy consumption, we should remember and be guided by basic economic principles. 1. People face trade-offs. 2. The cost of something is what you give up to get it. 3. Rational people think at the margin, seeking marginal benefit over marginal cost. And lastly, people respond to incentives. Thank you.